Hello, everybody. It's Zach here from RealEstateLicenseWizard.com. Today, we're talking about eminent domain in real estate. Eminent domain is one of the government powers we actually briefly touched on in one of our previous videos where we went over all the government powers. I encourage you guys to watch that one first if you haven't already. That way, you kind of understand what government powers are. I'm going to go ahead and link that up there and down below so you can check that one out. Oh, and also we're going to cover condemnation and the difference between the two. So condemnation and eminent domain in this video, so stay tuned for that at the very end because it's super interesting. Anyways, as always, we're going to talk about the definition today, how it deals with real estate, and what to remember for the real estate exam. So let's just jump right into it. So eminent domain. Eminent domain is the right of the government to take over privately owned real estate for public use. Now, it's worth noting, in some cases, private entities may also have the power of eminent domain for projects if it's considered public use. So what does all this mean? Well, as it states, eminent domain is the constitutional right of the government to take over privately owned real estate for public use, usually despite the owner's wishes. Now, eminent domain for the federal government is actually protected under the Fifth Amendment, while for state governments, it's protected under the 14th Amendment. Now, as you saw earlier, you heard that word public use. Now, when you hear the term public use, just think of infrastructure like highways, pipelines, railroads, etc., that kind of stuff. Now, there are actually some instances where eminent domain can be used alternatively. So maybe in a unique circumstance. And I'm going to give the biggest example. So for instance, all real estate, if you guys ever heard about this, super interesting, but in Centrella, Pennsylvania, was claimed by the state government under eminent domain back in 1992. It was claimed due to the city's dangerous environment having constant fires from a mining accident. Pretty interesting, huh? So as you can see though, eminent domain isn't just used for things like highways or infrastructure, although commonly it is. But there are some other unique circumstances. Anyways, let's go over a classic textbook example. So let's say Mr. Johnson lives on property right next to a bridge. The state wants to widen the bridge due to the higher amounts of traffic reported. The state needs space on either side of the bridge to widen the road. Now, the government then seizes Mr. Johnson's property and gives him $150,000 for it. Mr. Johnson does not have the opportunity to say no, because it's the law. However, he can challenge whether that $150,000 is fair market value, which we are going to touch on a little bit later. Now let's talk about condemnation. Now, I know we're jumping ship a bit, but in a few moments, you're going to realize why they go hand in hand. So condemnation is the procedure used by a public or private entity with the powers granted from eminent domain to take privately owned real estate. Doesn't that sound a little bit familiar? Well, it is. See, condemnation and eminent domain are almost the same thing. The only difference is one is the right, while the other is the action to do that right. Or in other words, eminent domain is the right which grants the government to take privately owned land from someone, while condemnation is the action of taking that land. I hope that makes sense. Now, one last thing on condemnation. Try not to confuse condemnation with a property being condemned. That is when a building is legally unfit for a human to live or is typically unsafe, or both actually. But this comes into play if a building is not up to code or has some zoning violations. However, the definitive difference is the government does not take the title of the property. It just forbids someone from living there until the homeowner addresses or fixes the problem. Now, to take one thing a step further, we're going to cover inverse condemnation. So inverse condemnation is the event in which the government takes private property but fails to pay compensation or just compensation. Remember earlier when I told you Mr. Johnson can challenge whether what he received for his home was fair value or fair market value? Well, that's inverse condemnation. A property owner can sue to obtain the required just compensation through the process of inverse condemnation. I hope that makes sense. So, what do you need to know for the real estate exam? Well, understanding condemnation and inverse condemnation are important for your real estate career. However, understanding eminent domain is essential for exam day. Most importantly, though, you have to be able to distinguish what eminent domain is and understand when it is happening. An example of what you might see on exam day is a question describing a situation where the government comes in and takes someone's land for public use. You obviously have to know that that is an instance of eminent domain. But yeah, that's pretty much everything you need to know about eminent domain, condemnation, and inverse condemnation. This video is part of our Answering a Real Estate Exam series where we discuss specific vocab and topics for the real estate exam. Please check out the rest of those videos so you are as prepared as possible for your exam day. We also have another video covering escheat, which is another government power, which I will link down below and above. If you do have any questions or comments, though, please leave them down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real estate exam related stuff. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Zachary Smiggle. As always, make today magical.